Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Today we continue our look back at projects we've done in the past, ones we think you'll like, that challenge the woodworker and result in a useful piece of furniture that evokes the historical past. Today we look back at a project called the Nantucket Settle. Nantucket because that's where we found the original. And settle, a seldom used word, for bench, where 2 or 3 people could sit together in some comfort. The one we found was made out of old English pine, and it featured 9 flat panels. The legs were turned on a lathe, there was a storage compartment under the seat, and the finish was that wonderful old pine color, simply glowing with multiple coats of beeswax. When I built our version, I decided to make it out of cherry, but I could have used oak or pine as well. The cherry is a handsome wood, takes finishes beautifully, and is strong enough to take some abuse. For years, ever since I built mine, it's been in my front hallway near the front door, where it gets constant use. Yet it gets more beautiful with age. So next, it's off to Nantucket to find us a settle. Then we'll come back here and build one out of cherry. That's next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop. Here in the home of a good friend, there are several pieces of furniture that you may recognize. Remember when I built a hutch like this in the new Yankee Workshop? And over here, one of the harvest tables that I built out of cherry. Over in the dining area is a table made out of heart pine that came right out of the workshop, and I understand that this gets a lot of use from 5 grandchildren. Now among the new pieces there are several antiques, and this is the one I wanted to show you today. It's a settle. It sits just beyond this low kitchen wall. Now I suppose you could slide this up to the table and use it as a dining bench, but here it works perfectly as a place to put on your shoes, and because it has storage below, it's a good place for the jigsaw puzzles and the games. Now there's all types of woodworking in here, a little bit of turning, some curved pieces, even some panel work. This would be a fun project. Now the only change that I'm going to make to the settle is the wood. I'm going to use cherry. That'll give it a little bit more of a formal look. And instead of depending on measurements I might take in the field, I've actually brought the settle to the workshop. Now as I build it, I will develop a plan with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. The piece that I'm working on right now is this front leg and armrest support. It's turned along the top section. The best way to take square stock and turn it into a cylinder is to use a gouge, a concave wood turning tool. Now before I go back to turning, let's remember shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. And also when I'm doing wood turning, I like to wear a full face shield. Okay, that's good. Now we'll lay out the various features. Now using a caliper, I can measure the diameter of the turning. I bring it over to where the layout of the actual area that I want to remove material is, and I'll use my parting tool to turn it down to the correct diameter. Now I'm going to switch to a smaller gouge to cut in the details. The next piece to make is the back leg backrest, and from the seat up it tips to the back slightly. Now I've laid out on a piece of 1 3/4 cherry the pattern, and I'm going to rough it out using the bandsaw, leaving the line and then some. Now to smooth up the cuts on the outer edges, I'm going to use the joiner, which I've set at a 1/64 of an inch. I'll make light passes until I just remove that line. All right, now a few minutes at the drum sander to smooth out the inside edge. Now in the past you've seen me use drums over at the drill press. This is an oscillating spindle sander, which means that not only does the drum turn, but it goes up and down. That gives us better use of the sandpaper drum, and it gives you a much smoother finish. Now I'll just trim it to length at the miter box. The rails are joined to the legs with mortise and tenon joints. You can see the peg that pins the tenon in place. I've laid out the location of the mortises on my leg blanks, and I'm going to use my mortiser to take out the material. It has a hollow chisel with a drill bit down through the center. The drill bit removes most of the material, the chisel squares it up. The panels on the backrest of the settle and along the bottom sit in grooves that are milled in the stiles and the rails. Now the width of the groove needs to be 5/16 of an inch wide. So I've set up my dado head cutter for 1/4 inch width and adjusted the rib fence so that it's 9/32 from the blade. First I'll run one face against the rib fence, then I'll turn it around and run the other face against the rib fence, and that assures me that the groove is perfectly centered and the correct width. With my regular saw blade now in the saw, I can start milling the tenons on the end of each rail. I've set up a gauge block and adjusted the fence the right distance from the blade. The first cut to make is called the shoulder cut. To make the next cut, I want to raise the saw blade to 3/8 of an inch, and that's easy to do with a depth adjustment gauge like this one. With the saw set, I want to make a shoulder cut opposite the groove edge and then remove the rest of the material by nibbling it away. This accessory is a tenoning jig, and it's the perfect tool for holding the rails and stiles in a vertical position to make the cheek cuts safely. Well, before I quit tonight, I'm going to finish a few more mortises. Tomorrow morning, we'll dry fit the pieces together. Oh, good morning. I started today by assembling some of the parts of our settle. No glue yet. This is the back assembly. The joints seem to be nice and tight and flush. The next detail I want to turn my attention to is a chamfer detail. It's on the rails and stiles and the legs where they surround the panels. Now the chamfer stops short of this corner by about an inch. And also along this backrest piece, I want to stop the chamfer as it approaches the arm, otherwise I'll have a groove right through there. Now I bet these originals were cut with a chisel. I'm going to use a router with a chamfering bit that has a ball bearing guide. Well, that's pretty good. Now where I've already machined the grooves in these other parts, I have a little bit of a problem. The bearing has no place to rest. An easy solution for that is to make some fillers that fit into the groove, and now I can just proceed. Okay, that's good. There are a couple chamfers that I can't complete without breaking part of the assembly apart. This one right here, and this one right here, and the same thing on the other end. The problem is that the backrest projects beyond the rail, not allowing the router to go by far enough. Once the leg is removed, we'll be able to complete it. Now I've just completed making all the chamfers on the front panel assembly. And the next thing I want to do is make a groove in the legs to receive the panels. I'll do that at the router table. The groove that I need to machine will run from mortise to mortise. So I've transferred around some indicator marks which show me the end of the mortise. I'll use the split in the fence to drop it over the router bit, slide it through until I reach the second mark, and then pull it away. Now I'm using a 5/16 inch diameter router bit, which matches the grooves in the stiles and rails. Because it's a small bit, and this is hard wood, I'll achieve the depth I want with 2 passes. First run it through, raise the bit, do it again. The last groove that I have to make is from this mortise to this one. But look what happens when I put the leg against the fence. Because of the curve, it's too far away. Now if I turn it around so that the curve is away from the fence, that helps, but I'm going to have to slide the fence back to get the bit centered in the mortise. Okay, that takes care of the last of the chamfering details. Here's the first arm, complete except for sanding. Let me show you how I made it. I started out by cutting a cardboard template of the original arm. I have a piece of blank stock that I laid it out on, leaving an inch extra on this end for a tenon that's going to fit into the back leg backrest piece. To start forming the tenon on the end of the arm, I'm using the same procedures I used earlier on the stiles and rails with the stop block and my miter gauge. But because the end of the armrest is angled, I have to turn the miter gauge to 10 degrees as I make each pass. Once again, I use my tenoning jig to make the cheek cuts. The rest of the cuts can be made at the bandsaw. That takes care of the tenon. Now, before I finish shaping the top of the arm, I want to keep the nice flat surface so that I have something solid to rest on my drill press table, which has been tilted to 5 degrees. First hole I want to drill is an 1 3/4 counter bore, and that's to receive part of the turning of the front leg. Well, now I'm going to switch to a 1-inch Forstner bit. Now this will be the hole to receive the tenon from the front leg. Well, now I'm just going to sand them and round over the corners a little bit. Now I'm going to tilt the table of my spindle sander to about 8 degrees so that I can bevel back the top and bottom edges. I want to show you the bottom on our antique settle. It's made up of boards that are just nailed into the rail. Then a band of wood was added to cover the end grain. I think it would look better without this band, so I'm going to rabbet the bottom edge of the rails to receive the boards for the bottom. Now I want to round over the top of each backrest piece. To do that, I'm going to use my sanding center. And finally, some assembly. Glue in the mortises and on the tenons. You'll slip everything together and clamp it in place. And now for the panels, some pieces of cherry that I've planed down to 5/16 of an inch thick. No glue here. Now the arm. On the antique original, all the tenons were locked into the mortises with dowel pins, and we'll do the same. Now I'm using a 3/8 inch diameter bit, and the holes are about an inch deep. Now I was able to get some cherry dowels. We'll just hammer them in place, and I'll sand them flush after the glue dries. Now, one of the things that we really liked about this piece is its lightness. There's not a lot of structure to weigh it down, but there is a price to pay for that. And in the case of this project, it seems like the seat is a little too flexible, and the back may have been too flexible. So these quarter-round moldings were added both in the front and the back to stiffen it up. Now, we're using cherry, which is a little bit stiffer, so I'd like to avoid this detail. But in any case, I'm going to have to form the bottom of this rail to conform to the angle between the seat and the backrest, and that's 6.5 degrees. Now, I don't want to make any mistakes, so I've tipped my table saw to 6.5 degrees, and I want to make sure the face of the rail is down. Well, it's getting a little late, but before I leave, I'm going to glue up this backrest. Tomorrow, we'll finish up the settle. Oh, good morning. Here at last, we see our settle coming together. Now, before I could start the assembly, I had to chamfer the top edge of the backrest panel. Once that was done, I applied glue to all the mortises and the tenons. We'll slip it all together and clamp it up. Glue alone would be enough to hold these joints together. But I'm going to add a dowel pin for more strength. And the original had pins, so we're going to use them too. Let's look at the seat on the antique settle. It's made up of several boards, one on each end that's notched around the legs, and a piece that joins the two end pieces with a decorative bead that goes all the way around the opening for the lid. Now, I've laid out some 7/8 inch thick stock for the notch around the leg, and I've got one of them clamped in my vise, and the back saw is the perfect tool to make that notch. Well, those fit good. Now I can remove the piece and run that decorative bead along the edge. To make that bead, I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch radius router bit, which I've set up in my router table. The next operation is to actually remove part of this bead to create a shelf that goes between the two end pieces. Now, I'm going to use my router, which is set up with a 3/8 inch rabbiting bit. Now I'm just going to use a utility knife first to undercut the remaining lip here. I want to clean it right back to where my bead cutter left off. And I also want to clean up this miter area using a sharp chisel. Now here's a couple boards that I glued up to make that back piece to connect the ends. I'm not going to need the whole width right now, but I'll keep it that way. I'm going to run a bead right along this edge. And there it is, cut to length. There's the corresponding rabbet on the underside of the back piece. I'm adjusting my miter saw to 45 degrees so that I can miter the bead to meet the end pieces. Well, let's see how it fits. Not bad. Now here's a blank that I'm going to use for the lid on the seat. I'm just marking the location of the mortises for the hinges. Now here along the back of the bench, I want to mark the intersection of the ends in this piece so that I can rip it to the correct width. I'm using a sharp utility knife to give me the outline of the hinge. Now you'll notice that I've clamped both the back piece and the lid together, and that gives me a broader surface onto which I can rest my router. Now I'm using a 1/2-inch mortising bit to remove the material. A sharp chisel is all I need to remove the rest of the material. Now to secure the various elements of the seat to the base, I'm going to use some dowels installed with a little bit of glue. Now the original was just nailed. I think the dowels will look a lot nicer. Now a couple more dowels back here will secure the back piece to the base. The next thing to do is to make a molding that wraps around the seat. And if you look at it in cross-section, you can see that it's a bullnose at the top and a scotia at the bottom, all one piece. Now here's a strip of cherry that I'll form the molding from. I'm going to make the bullnose first, so I'm using my largest beading bit, which is a 3/4 inch diameter. I've also installed a feather board to keep the stock tight to the table. Now because it's hardwood and we're removing a lot of material, it'll take 2 passes. Now I've adjusted the fence to give me the full profile of the bit, and we'll make the second pass. To form the cove portion of the molding, I have to run the stock through on the flat. To support it, I've added a cleat on each side of my fence, once again the feather board, and I'm using a 1/2-inch cove bit. Now here it's just a matter of cutting the pieces to fit, mitering the corners, and attaching them with 1.5-inch brads. Now would be a good time to install the hinges. These cleats will support the lid, and they're installed with some glue and brads. Now for the bottom of the settle, I'm just using some pine. There's no sense in wasting good cherry on the bottom. It's only going to be seen when the lid is open. All right. Well, I think it's a pretty good facsimile of our antique. A lot of sanding and more sanding, and then it'll be ready for some finish. Well, I think the best way to show off the beauty of this cherry is to finish it with oil. And what I have in my bucket is an antique oil finish. Now I just flood it on with a foam brush, give it a nice generous coat, and after it sets for about 15 or 20 minutes, I'll wipe off any excess. Now the wood is dry, so I think it's going to take at least 2 coats to seal it up. After it dries for about 3 or 4 days, I think to give it a little extra protection and a slight gloss, I'm going to wipe on some polyurethane. Well, I think I have just about the perfect place for this settle at my house. And you know, this cherry is just going to get richer and finer looking with age. Now next time we're going to build a tiger maple washstand. We found the antique original in a private collection down in Savannah, Georgia. And we think that this will make a great nightstand. I'll show you how to build one next time, right here in the new Yankee Workshop.
for a home video or a measured drawing of the project you've just seen, please call 866-545-9708. Additional information is available at newyankee.com.